Police officers of Reddit, who's the smartest criminal you've ever encountered? Here's one. I knew this guy back in the early 80s. Let's call him Jim. Well, he really wanted this high-powered super bike, but he knew he couldn't ever afford it. So what he did was to take drive to London and scout it about for a few days until he found that particular model parked outside a house. He goes back that night with a slide hammer, pulls the lock, and steals the bike. He gets it home, puts it in his garage, and completely strips it, so that the only thing left is the frame and the bottom half of the engine, which he drags into the weeds at the bottom of his garden. Then he pours fuel over it and burns it a bit. A few weeks pass, and weeds have started growing over it. It's at that point he calls the cops and reports that someone had dumped a bike frame in his garden. The cops show up, and he explains that he'd just got back from being away and found it. The cops take the frame and note down high name and address. A few days later, the cops call him and say that the bike had been stolen from London a month or so ago, from the serial number on the bottom half of the engine and frame, and that the insurance company had classed the bike as a write-off and had told the cops to dispose of it. Now, because the frame was found in his garden and the insurance company didn't want it, the cops were duty bound to ask him if he wanted to keep it or if they should throw it. So he tells them that he'd always wanted to build a bike. He gets the frame back from them, repaints it, then puts it all back together and re-registers it as a Q-Reg, stolen and recovered. I forgot to call him Jim, didn't I? Edit, / to all the people asking if I'm Jim. No, I'm not. I knew him well though. We went to school together, and he lived a few doors down from me. I had my own group of friends, and occasionally when out at the pub, we would bump into him, and he'd tell us of his exploits without a care in the world. As far as that bike goes, he proudly told a few people about it, but you know, we don't grass. He crashed the bike a few months later and was injured, but I can't remember how. He was pretty much a career criminal the last time I saw him, and ended up in jail for a while. While many regard him as scum, I always felt bad for him. Both his parents died before he was 12, and he was in and out of care homes for years. Out of his 4 brothers, one was murdered, the other died of an asthma attack, and another committed suicide. He could never hold down a job, and also suffered from depression. The bloke had a shit life. It's been more than 25 years since I saw him last, and I often wonder how he's doing. Edit 2. Thanks for the gold, my man. Obligatory, not a cop, but close on. 20 years ago now, a guy on Australia's Gold Coast got away with a bank robbery in broad daylight. He cased the bank for a while and discovered a pattern of the bank manager arriving about 30 minutes before anyone else each morning, where he would leave the front doors unlocked so staff could help themselves in without a key or needing to wait for the boss to come and let them in. One morning the crook dressed himself up for a busy day of office work and waited for the bank manager to arrive. As the manager was unlocking the doors, he made his move, entering the building and threatening the manager with a gun. He got all the details he'd need to access the vault and so forth, and then tied the manager up and stuffed him in his office. When the staff arrived, he told them that the manager had called in sick and that regional office had sent him in to do the open shop thing, and no one batted an eyelid. This bank had a small walk-in vault that normally only held about 30-50k on any given day, but old mate had timed his robbery for the morning after business banking day, when all the local small businesses would make their end of week deposits, and reportedly got a score of close to 250k. Once the vault was open, he pulled his gun out and invited all the staff to enter the vault and locked them in. By this stage the bank was due to be open, so when he went to leave there were a number of customers waiting to get inside to do their banking. He told them all that there had been an issue with the computers and that the tech team had estimated it would take about 30 minutes before the issue would be resolved, and that they couldn't open until then. Then he got into his car and drove straight to the airport and flew to Hong Kong and then disappeared. To my knowledge, the cops never caught him and never managed to find the money. They knew he'd have had to leave most of it in Australia somewhere, because you can only take 10k odd in cash and any currency out of the country before customs pulls you into their interview rooms. So the assumption was that he had to have an accomplice here who would funnel the money to him slowly over time. Edit. For those wondering, he was identified later after witness statement and CCTV led to his getaway car being discovered at the airport where he boarded a plane destined for Hong Kong, which is as far as they could track him. A guy, let's call him Dave, I worked with told this story. He was working at a Mercedes dealership. He was sitting at his desk when this well-dressed gentleman comes in and asks if he could test drive a specific car that was parked out front. It was also a busy day. Usually they are allowed to let people test drive by themselves after they have taken some form of a deposit or something. Maybe the official ID or something. Not really relevant. So Dave gives out the keys. The guy goes on his test drive and comes back a reasonable amount of time later. He walks in and hands off the key, gets his deposit / whatever back. This was about closing time, even possibly on a Friday. Everything is in order. Fast forward to the next business day. Dave's boss walks in and realizes that one of the Mercedes out front is gone. Dave has to explain that the car was returned and that they have the key and everything. Turns out the criminal didn't test drive. He drove somewhere to create a replica of the key and gave that replica back to the desk. He kept the real key. That smart son of a bitch. Edit. Dave is not the criminal. He is the employee. Apparently people think Dave is the criminal. Edit 2. It was probably part of this group. Edit 3. Okay, maybe the key wasn't copied, but switched or something. I didn't put much thought into the details of the story, since Dave told me this story a few years ago. I also don't know much about key security on modern cars. Not a cop. There was an incident in Fargo, ND where a guy wanted to steal electronics equipment. The store had plenty of alarms on it, and generally cutting an alarm triggers an alarm, so instead he cut all the alarms. This was before cell phones were really widespread and alarms were usually just connected to the phone line. He found an access point to one of the phone company's big trunk lines. Correction. 9 access points. Massive thick copper cables with tens of thousands of lines running through them. He cut through the whole thing with a circular saw, knocked out phone service to most of the town, and robbed an audio store during the ensuing chaos. There were no leads until a tip came in from another town, where he'd pulled something similar. They hadn't been able to pin that to him, but had strong suspicions and he'd relocated to Fargo, so the cops pay him a visit. He refused to let them in, because they didn't have a warrant, so the cops left to get one without leaving anyone to watch him and he split. When they came back they found the saw coated in copper dust and a lot of the stolen stuff. He was in the wind for a while, but even after he got caught he had another card to play. While being transported between prisons he used a key he'd made to unlock his shackles and climbed out the roof vent of the bus. Edit. Went looking for the news articles, but found the case. You noticed that the bank vault had put its safety deposit boxes in a way that there was a space at the 90-degree point, that wall meets wall. He times it on a Friday and climbed and hid in that spot. He had actually rented out a box which he put in a clock which alarms violently to see if there are sound sensors in the vault. Waited outside. Nothing. Employees closed the vault with him inside. He has the whole weekend and gets to knocking the locks out with a hammer one at a time and stole everything. He then replaced the locks back to look like they are not tampered with and jumped back into the spot. Monday morning the vault is open. Turns out bank was doing renovations. He picked that day, throws on a worker's jacket and literally walks out the bank. Employees did not notice till the first person who came to open his safety deposit box. The lock fell in. They could not identify who did it, and he would have got away with it save his big mouth. Turns out he was a hairdresser and kept telling his customers how he stole from the bank and he was a genius and they will never catch him. Someone snitched and he was picked up. They could not value what he stole as safety box contents are unknown. Because of this dude, all banks now fill the space where the two safety cabinets meet with concrete. Made a movie Inside Man loosely based on him. His name was William Smarto. Not a copper, but this was pretty smart. I used to run bars at a number of venues around the north of England, one of which was Chester Rats of course. Usually, we'd just have to keep an eye out for scousers trying to nick drinks or sneak in without paying, and with it being so close to Liverpool there was a fair amount of security on site you could tell them, as they'd be suited, booted, a high-vis waistcoat on, and usually carrying a radio. Now there were a dozen or so bars dotted around the course, and you can imagine the amount of money that was taken from 100,000 or so punters drinking steadily from 11 until 8 or 9 in the evening. So every hour or so, the security would go round the bars in turn and take all the high denomination notes from each till and stick them in the safe in the main building. So I'm stood there one day, pulling pints doing the barman thing. The security blokes have been round a few times and it's getting steadily busier. Then one bloke shows up on his own, Hivis on and radio in his hand, does the till, leaving the usual receipt, so we can balance up at the end of the meeting. Bit early I think, but hey ho, I've got plenty to do. Then 10 minutes or so later, 2 more blokes show up, dressed the same. "Oh, your mate's just been here," I said. "No need to touch that just yet." "What mate? We are the only 2 doing this duty today." Cue a rapid fire and increasingly panicked exchange over the radio. Matey boy who'd done the till before used to work there apparently. So he knew the drill and he'd been watching the guards and knew just when to time it and what order they were going round the bars in. Apparently he got round 9 or 10 before he decided not to push his luck any further and walked away with about 80 grand. We heard later just took off the Hivis, dumped that in the radio, and he's just one more guy in a suit in a crowd of thousands. They were a bit stricter on the procedure after that. Not a cop, and this is not as smart as some of the guys on here, but it's probably one of the smartest robberies in my small city. One of the main streets is cut into a hillside, and, as a result, there is a very steep and quite tall concrete covered bank immediately behind the buildings. Between 2 buildings there is a gap that was filled at the street end by an ATM. To access it for filling, the security staff went through the next door building, out a side door, and into the gap, which had the ATM at one end and the steep bank at the other. On the Friday before Christmas, when the ATM was to be filled to the brim, one of the robbers abseiled down the bank at night into the gap and waited for the guys to arrive to fill the ATM. They came early in the morning. As they came through the door into the gap, he held them up, took the money, and took off through the building to an accomplice waiting in a van on the main street. Then the van took off on the main road out of the city and vanished. After a big search, the police finally found the burnt out van. Turned out the gang had driven it up a gorge road and had 2 other accomplices in cars at the top and bottom of the gorge who simultaneously drove really slowly into the gorge and held up the traffic so that no one was there to see them when they turned off down an access road into some bush. They ended up being caught because one of the gang was a former employee of the security company. Friend's older brother and friends used to rob cars. Never did it anywhere except for movie theaters. Guaranteed those people aren't coming back out for 2 hours. They'd take their girlfriends, 2 guys, 2 girls, wait in their car, hanging out until they saw a car with too much money, usually booming bass and loud music, which guaranteed a few grand worth of stereo equipment. They'd wait until the driver went in, give it another 30 minutes just to be safe, all walk over together, and use a center punch to knock out the driver's window and push it into the seat in one piece. Immediately they'd open the doors and cut the alarm wires if there was an alarm going off and just start hanging out. Even if someone in the lot noticed the alarm and turned to look, they just saw 2 guys and 2 girls near a car with the doors open, looking like the driver was a dumbass who forgot to shut off his alarm, which was confirmed when it went off in a few seconds. Then they'd proceed to just clean out the car. Usually amps, subs, speakers, etc. right in broad daylight. With 4 of them it just looked like some guys working on their stereo. They'd close the doors and then leave. They did this for a year or 2 before eventually getting caught because a father was waiting for his kids to come out and saw the entire process happen. They did sometime. It was one of the smartest, stupidest things I'd ever heard about. I used to work at Chase Bank. At the time, upper management demanded that we bankers work the lobby, meaning we would grab people from the teller line and help them do their transactions. But it was just an excuse to try to get new accounts, credit cards, etc. This particular day, it's midday, and it is super busy, and one of us, the female bankers, got up to grab somebody from the line. She asks the man if he needs help, and he responds in Spanish. He says that he is okay with waiting, but she insists that he comes with her, so he follows. He sat down at her desk and handed her his note that said he had a bomb and that he was robbing the place. She looked at him and said, "Oh, you got to get in line for this." The guy did exactly as she told him. She went and told the manager on the teller side what was going on. He called the man over and opened up a window specifically for him. She went to the bathroom to go hyperventilate. The manager proceeded to give the bank robber somewhere in the neighborhood of $10,000. The guy left and ran a few blocks down where we assumed the getaway car was. Nobody knew what was going on. The phone started ringing and I picked it up. "This is Chase Corporate Security. We just received an alarm from your branch. Is everything okay?" Hahaha, okay. That's funny. You got me. Who is TH? Just then I look up and start seeing a lot of commotion. A manager is locking doors. People are shuffling around quickly. You know what? I think something did happen. I put them on hold and asked the manager and he confirmed we were robbed. He then took the call. A week later, a similar situation happened at a bank down the street. This was just as they were opening. They had a different type on entrance. Double doors on the main street, a foyer and double doors into the branch. The robber goes in the main street in trance, walks through the foyer, and realizes the doors to enter the branch were locked. He knocks, someone walks over, and he slips them the note, again stating he has a bomb. The employee read the note and was able to lock the street in trance from inside, effectively locking this dude in the foyer. The employees all hustle out the back, the cops are called, and he's arrested without incident. He isn't the same guy who robbed us, but the MO is the same. Spanish speaking with a perfectly crafted note in English. So the cops asked him where he got the note, and he said that some guys picked him up at a labor site and told him that he would make $1,000 just for dropping off this note. Then because he didn't speak English he didn't know what the note said. I don't know if they ever hit another bank or if they were ever caught, but that has always stuck out to me as one of the smartest crimes. They are picking up somebody who is completely unassuming and who doesn't know them whatsoever. They are giving him vague instructions with a note that he cannot understand. And I'm sure once the transaction is complete, they are dropping him off at the labor site and moving on with their lives. Not police, but corrections. The smartest prisoner I've encountered was also the only legitimate psychopath I've known. Young, charming, attractive and bordering genius levels when it came to law. Some people waste time while locked up. She didn't. Every night was spent studying law books religiously. For those unaware, US inmates are granted access to a law library to work their cases. In the course of a couple years, she ditched her personal lawyer and started representing herself successfully, writing motions, appeals, and making a killing doing the same for other inmates. If there was a technicality to be found, she found it. I imagine these are the kind of folks that end up corporate lawyers. While incarcerated, she always had a steady stream of drugs, even while in isolation, primarily cocaine. She'd instigate officers and inmates alike, create a situation then bring a case. You had to document everything with this girl. When you're accused of misconduct and cannot prove beyond any doubt otherwise, you become a liability. Several good officers were terminated during her stay. Requests to transfer her to other detention centers in the state were denied as no one was willing to take her. She ended up successfully dodging prison and being sent to a drug treatment center. Prolonged cocaine use took its toll and she had a massive stroke in her mid-20s, leaving her partially paralyzed. That didn't stop her though. During an altercation, she got out of her wheelchair, picked it up, and beat another prisoner nearly to death with it. That's been years ago, and I have no idea whatever happened to her as I left that line of work. TLDR, American Psycho meets lockup. Not a Leo. Here's some memorable retail ones. Best Buy got robbed by people cutting through the ceiling and dropping down from there lifting electronics out the roof like Mission Impossible. No one was caught. Music retail chain would take deposits on upcoming releases then would call you when it'd arrive and hold it for you under your name. The thing is that even when you'd call and talk to the people they may never come in for their item. So a store manager gets the brilliant idea to come in early to work and use the deposits to buy gift cards for themselves. POS, point of sale, systems were so awful at the time that using a gift certificate deposits to buy a single gift certificate didn't flag the system. District manager is supposed to come in and audit our receipts, but he never did hers, assuming because she was a favorite. One day an assistant manager shows up 5 minutes early to work, sees that there's some sort of transactions on the receipt roll of a register, but the store isn't opened yet. Waits till manager leaves for day and pulls the receipt roll. Catches it. Music retail chain, different location. Full-time employee and union member working at location for upwards of 15 years. Very antisocial and bad at customer service, so they use him for all truck operations. Opening deliveries, setting things up to be stocked by other employees. This guy was awful to everyone, but he always volunteers to take out all the store's garbage, which is a sheet job that anyone could do. I get suspicious and get the opportunity to follow him out by another entrance while he takes out the garbage. One time, I see him head to the dumpster and then remove 3 giant industrial black garbage bags out of the trash. We are talking like 2.5 times the largest leaf bags for lawns. I wait till he gets to his car, then yell his name. "Yo Candy, bring me those bags." He starts stuttering. "Snake, it's not what you think." I open the first bag. It's completely full of the hottest and latest DVDs, CD''S and video games. This dude had been robbing the store blind for years. I suspended him on the spot and tell him loss prevention will contact him. Typically the thief doesn't respond to loss prevention's attempts to contact, and after 3 days you fire them for job abandonment. Same sheet. EDM who missed the thief manager's deposit scam from above gets a hard on to get this guy. Lets the guy finally schedule a loss prevention interview 3 weeks later. Candy brings a lawyer, says I didn't do anything, manager's word against mine. They bring him back and pay him back pay for time suspended. Candy begins calling loss prevention on the daily to complain I'm a thief. I make sure every customer on earth that walks in he has to personally help, which ends up finally driving him to quit. Best Buy again. Customer service counter worker, where they do returns, waits till any big box item reaches the maximum date of a price adjustment. Then price adjusts the item, refunding the difference as cash and leaving it in the register. They had to memorize which transactions and correlate the sales flyers and the numbers and scarce. Loss prevention couldn't figure out how the worker was getting the cash out of the register though, because there were no cameras that captured them ever getting it out of the register. See if you can guess how. I have my own ideas. Music retail chain. A worker I refused to hire who was related to another manager was hired while I ran a different store location for 4th quarter. Assistant manager's cousin. The cousin would write down credit card info from receipts, then buy items by having high school girls come in to buy items with him punching the stolen info. He's then meet them after shift and sell the items for cash at a music retail chain that would buy and resell the items. This fueled his coke habit. He was caught when an FBI agent noticed they had been charged for a PlayStation 2 at a location after coming in. He was blonde, blue-eyed, and she didn't want to press charges and ruin his life. So she let him just apologize, and the parents paid her back. I can't tell you how many people he robbed this way. The corporation didn't want me to find out and open up a can of worms. They just let him quit and no one was reprimanded. If anyone reads this, enjoy. Having worked as a disciplinary officer in corrections, I've always been amazed at the ingenuity of inmates. The problem most run into is the follow-up of the crime they commit. Our department received a call one night that there were 3 of our inmates walking down a street a short distance away from our jail. The 3 were caught quickly. They were still wearing their stripes. However, upon doing a roster check, it was discovered there was still one missing. He was caught about a month later. So, the ingenuity was more in how they escaped. They were housed in one of our maximum security tiers. After lockdown, there is really only one way out of the cell. There is a very narrow window in each cell overlooking the yard. This was never really seen as a viable escape risk, as they were so narrow one would have to be really skinny to even attempt to try to squeeze through. Due to lack of staffing, our guard tower stayed unmanned, so they took note of that. They spent a year losing weight and observing the officers that worked the tier, taking note of which ones were lax in their duties. They loosened one of the windows, and when they finally reached a weight where they could all fit through, they took their opportunity. The officer on duty that night was so lax he didn't notice that 4 men entered a 2-man cell at lockdown. Not just that, he didn't do a roster check at lockdown. So they got out and used a mattress to climb over the razor wire. The problem is they didn't have a good strategy for after they escaped. The one that was out the longest was probably the smartest, as he decided to part ways with the three who felt like it was a good idea to walk on a street in their prison stripes. But he had no real plan either. He spent his time living in people's fishing camps when they weren't around. He was caught when one of the campers surprised him and called the department, who was able to locate him shortly thereafter. Not police officer, but worked in the county jail. We had just started up a partnership with ICE to help deport illegal immigrants that had been arrested. Yes, the controversial 287G program. Save your feelings on that program and enjoy the tale. Guy gets arrested for public intoxication. He's Canadian, and his flight back to Canada leaves that night. His mom was on the flight or at the airport when he got arrested and couldn't bail him out. He happened to be booked in prior to midnight of the day we officially began enforcing the deportation stuff, so kind of perfect timing, right? His mom said she would either pay his bail or his trip home, not both. Guy is bummed, no idea how he's going to get out or go back home. I'm working the block he's in. He sees the immigration detainees, starts asking about them. A light bulb goes off in his mind. He calls his mom, gets her to post his bail, and was out later that day. I'm working in booking the next evening, and looky there, the Canuck is back. Highly intoxicated and ranting about how he's overstayed his visa and is here illegally and demands to be deported as soon as possible. He left jail, went and got hammered, and just made a night of trying to get arrested. Ironically, he said it took more effort to try to get arrested the second time than when he got arrested the first time. I think what finally got him the second time was that we or something, like he was banging uglies in public with the woman he was arrested with. So, took a bit longer, but he had a fun weekend and got a free trip back to Canada courtesy of the US. Edit, this was 10 years ago. It likely wasn't a visa violation, as I was corrected below. I can't recall specifics, but know he utilized the program to get a free trip to his home country through a night or two of debauchery. Not a cop, but my favorite bank robbery is easily Bank of America robbed by Anthony Curcio. TLDR, dude steal $400k plus from a Bank of America with only a can of pepper spray, escapes via in a tub, using a small army of Craigslist day workers as decoys. The story goes like this. For 3 months, Curcio observed a Brinks armored car make its deliveries to the Bank of America branch in Monroe, Washington. He took notes of the schedule, diagrammed locations of the bank's cameras, and noted the armored car's blind spots. He also estimated how much money was being transferred to the bank and how much was being removed via ATMs. He decided on using a local creek to escape and created a cable pulley system to quickly pull himself and large bags of cash upstream in the creek using a connected canvas wrapped in a tube. Curcio's planning culminated with an advertisement he placed on Craigslist a few days before the robbery. The online ad sought 15 to 20 workers for a fictitious city cleanup project, promising $28.50 an hour. The laborers were told to wear jeans, a blue shirt, work shoes, and a yellow safety vest. The ad also told the applicants they needed to bring safety goggles and a painter's mask. The ad directed them to meet in the Bank of America parking lot at the exact time Curcio planned to rob the armored car. On September 30th, 2008, Curcio, dressed identically to his decoy applicants, pretended to work the grounds near the bank. He pepper sprayed the Brinks armored car guard who was pushing a dolly loaded with money into the bank. Curcio grabbed 2 bags of money, containing more than $400,000, and ran toward the creek. Meanwhile, police arrived to find the bank's parking lot filled with men matching the robber's description. I'm going to relate one I heard from FinJD. John from the Offbeat Oregon History podcast around 1850 or so. There was a small boomtown built on top of an ear cliff, about a mile long and 100 feet or so high. The only way up or down was a narrow footpath that ran diagonally up it. A thief barges in on a poker game late one night, bandana over his face and 2 6-shooters drawn, just like in the movies. Stick 'em up, they stuck 'em up. Put the money in this bag. They did. Nobody move. He then runs out, jumps on his horse and takes off towards the cliff. Of course the instant they are clear the gamblers run for their horses, shooting and hollering for everyone to come quick and join a posse to catch the thief. The thief and his horse just gallop down the cliff. The entire posse is right behind him and all the horses put on the brakes, hard. They are not going over a cliff in the dark. The thief had spent weeks training his horse. First leading it up and down the trail during the day, leading it up and down the trail at night, walking it up and down the trail by day, walking it up and down the trail at night, till it was ready to just gallop down the trail at night. Not a cop, but there was a pool hall in town that was basically archers. A group of us, probably 15 or so, frequented this place at least a few times a week. Got a phone call from the owner one morning asking me if I had been there the night before and if I had seen anyone I didn't recognize. Somebody had broken in the night before and robbed the ATM for close to $20K. The culprit or culprits had opened up a fire exit door in the back corner of the hall, a door that could only be opened from the inside, which was one of the only places in a blind spot for the cameras. It used to be a bowling alley, so it had a strange layout in the back, and put duct tape across the striker, so the door wouldn't latch shut. There was a birthday party going on that night, and as such the place was full of unfamiliar faces. Shots were flowing like water, and with every round one was bought for the bartender. When it was time to close up shop, the bartender set the alarm, which is on a delay, proceeded through the first set of doors, locked them, then out the front door, and locked those up to. Unfortunately, because the fire exit door wasn't latched, the alarm didn't engage after the delay. Whoever set this up came back an hour later, as per the security camera on the inside, used a screwdriver to pry open the unlatched fire exit, and had a good 3 hours to pry open the ATM. At one point they took a fire axe to the money box and leave out the same way they came in, without setting off the alarm. Poor bartender from the night before was the one to discover all of this when she opened the place up at 10 AM the next day. They never caught the person or persons and had to file an insurance claim. Surprisingly, he didn't fire the bartender. The place was sold a few months later and is now a medical clinic. R.I.P. Doolies. Not a cop. Back in the 90s I worked for a boffer branch in a very wealthy community. It always held at least $250K in the safe, and often upwards of $1M plus. Many citizens with large businesses banked there, and many state agencies also brought in massive cash deposits from state parks and so forth. This branch was also somewhat isolated from surrounding areas, with only one road into and out of town, which theoretically made a bank robbery difficult, because the cops could easily block the exit route. Anyway, the manager told me of a story of a previous robbery. Apparently some guy had found out the names and home addresses of the branch manager, teller manager, and merchant teller, head teller. He went to their homes and took photos of the homes. He also followed other family members to find where they worked and went to school. Presumably this was over a long course of time. One day he showed up at the branch dressed in coveralls and with a large mechanic's toolbox on a cart and went over to the branch manager. Basically, he looked like he was there to fix something. He sat down and pulled out a folder with a brief letter on it stating this was a robbery and photos of the homes and family members and their schedule, where they were. He threatened to have his accomplices injure them if the robber did not call the accomplice every 15 minutes with an obvious connection to not setting off the alarm. The manager called over the teller manager and merchant tellers and explained what was going on. They all went into the safe and he loaded his cart with plastic wrapped cash bricks, no marked bills, which were stupidly arranged back then. There was a small bundle of various bills and that was it, and obviously no exploding die packs. He then wheeled it out, loaded it into a truck, and drove away. Police found the truck a few days later, and it was stolen but now empty. Total haul was $1.2 million. As far as I know he was never caught. Okay, not a cop, but I got scammed big time. Now this was damn nearly 20 years ago, so forgive the naive nature. I owned a big hot tub operation in the UK. Guy calls going nuts. He is a project manager on a big job for a high-end demanding customer. My asshole competitor has screwed up for the second time and not delivered his client's hot tub on time, citing shipping delays. His customer is gonna flip out. The deck is ready, his guys are on site, and he needs a 7-foot hot tub and is willing to pay if it can be delivered today. Of course I can't deliver it today, I'm 2 weeks out for a delivery slot. He pleads and begs, but I can't make it happen. He asks how hard is it to move, and lots of logistical questions about the ground prep and electrical requirements. Seems so legit. He says he does like 20 or so years a year and has so pissed off with the other company that I'm gonna get all his business. After again and again trying to tell him to fuck off cause I can't help him, he says shit, my cousin lives near you, can I get him to pick it up? Now in 2019 I would laugh, but then it was the norm. This asshole was smooth. I say sure, as long as it's paid for. Hes like, man, I'm 2 hours away, I can't get there to pay, but I can give you a credit card now. I'm Leary and insist his driver gives us his license and photograph it. It all goes fine, and he calls back a month later. He is doing a big job on a new build in a small cul-de-sac for 5 hot tubs. Gives me a couple cards to process and says he can handle delivery cause the first one was so easy. I tell him same DL, in those days you just took ID and it was good. Get a charge back a month later. Cards stolen, plates not matched to vehicles, licenses fakes. Took a hit for 40k pounds sterling, which at the time was damn near 60k USD. Almost killed me. The guy got caught, but his plan was still pretty brilliant. He wanted to rob a bank next to a river that ran through a forest. The day before the heist, he put a help wanted ad on Craigslist for painters at a higher than normal pay rate. He said he needed a lot of people, so just show up at the bank parking lot at 10 AM wearing white painter's clothes with a hood, a respirator, and goggles. The night before he'd tied a rubber raft under a bridge near the bank's parking lot. In the raft, he'd stashed a change of clothes and the keys to the getaway car that was parked downriver. On the day of the robbery, everything goes perfectly. He put on his painter disguise, got the money, and made his escape down the river after changing back into street clothes. When the police show up, they're faced with dozens of people dressed exactly like the robber, all of whom have no idea what's going on and none of whom have the money. Then a homeless guy walked out of the bushes. He thought it was weird seeing a guy in painters run under a bridge, change clothes and float away in a rubber raft with 2 large bags. He was able to give the police a detailed enough description of the robber and his getaway method that he was captured soon after. So, if you live in the Northwest and you're annoyed by the sizable homeless population, know that there's at least one person out there who dislikes them way more than you do. My dad was a cop, so while not knowing all the tricks of the trade, I definitely understood them insert. This occurred back in the 90s, edited for format, and TLDR I incriminated myself in order to have a cop perjure himself on the stand, just in order to make myself look like a better person than that cop. I went out partying with friends after work one night, made it a pretty late night, and closed the bars at 2 AM. The problem was that I was 60 miles from home, give or take. Being young, stupid, and fearless, I decided to go ahead and drive home. I wasn't completely smashed, but in retrospect I absolutely shouldn't have been driving. The alcohol plus 12-hour workday was not a good combination. So I made it approximately 50 miles back towards home, taking 2-lane and country roads the entire time. The one small stretch of 2-lane highway I pull on of course has a state trooper sitting in the dark waiting for people to drive by. I swerved a bit and was honest to the trooper about it because I was literally driving with my knee while trying to simultaneously light a cigarette with one hand and was digging on the radio with the other. However, I didn't cross the center line as he stated in his report. Nonetheless, I was pulled over. I was polite, exited the car when asked, attempted his roadside field sobriety tests, and was promptly placed under arrest for DUI. Now, most people at this point would think they were faked. However, remember that I said I understood the mindset of the cop. Most of them, no matter how trivial or earth-shattering the crime, will always try to be your buddy in hopes of a confession. Confessions make life easy for them. They don't have to go to court. So, we were friendly and actually chatted on the way back to the county jail. He mentioned that I had done pretty good on the roadside tests, considering how smashed I was. I laughed and assured him that I was just tired, not drunk. He reminded me that I had blown a .159 on the handheld breathalyzer. The legal limit was .10 back then. I was maybe 2 beers over. I told him that yes, that was probably accurate because I had only drank 4 to 5 beers, common lie when getting a DUI. He laughed and said there was no way I would be a 159 if I blew at the station. I was way more intoxicated than that. I told him I wasn't, and that's where the plan formulated for me. I knew that once we got to the station they will try and trick you into blowing into the breathalyzer there because it can actually be used as evidence in court, whereas the handheld field breathalyzer cannot. The usual way they try is to tell you that well if you blow, you'll just lose your license for 6 months and that's it. If you refuse, then you're going to be suspended for a year. I didn't care. I knew that being suspended for a year wasn't a big deal compared to having an actual DUI conviction on your record for life. So we arrived at the station and the trooper tried his best to get me to blow, so I wouldn't be without a license for a whole year. I said no thanks, I'm really not drunk, etc. He finally accepted it, and I signed my paperwork stating that I was refusing, etc. Once it was done, and I had my copies, he couldn't let it go. He said, tell you what, I think you're going to blow at least a 19 because it's been a while and that alcohol has been able to get into your bloodstream. How about you go ahead and blow and I'll tear the receipt up and throw it away here on the spot. I had him. I already had my paperwork stating I had refused. There was no way he could have admitted that in court because it would have been thrown out immediately because of coercion. I went ahead and blew. It was a .160, .001 higher than on the road. I smirked and said, told you so. He shook his head and said okay, I'm a man of my word, and he took the receipt from the machine and tore it up in front of me and tossed it in the trash. I paid my bail and went on my way. Fast forward to our day in court. I had hired probably one of the shrewdest country lawyers that anyone has ever met. This guy was like freaking Matlock. He has the trooper attempt the heel to toe sobriety test to show the jury how it should properly be done. The trooper, having rubber soles with tread on his shoes, did not fare well on carpet and nearly fell, having to grab onto the juror's box to keep his balance when trying to turn around. My lawyer asked with a grin, how much have you had to drink this morning? Making everyone except the judge, state's attorney, and trooper laugh. Next he put the trooper on the stand and grilled him about several things, to which the trooper begrudgingly admitted to, like being on a DUI higher back that night. After getting him sufficiently flustered, he went in for the kill. He asked the trooper bluntly, have you ever destroyed criminal evidence in a case? Of course the trooper said he absolutely hadn't. He was a man of integrity. So my lawyer asked him why he had destroyed the breathalyzer receipt proving my guilt. Troop said he didn't know what he was referring to. Lawyer said let's get the video footage from the jail and the jail deputy that was on duty that night here to testify. After a recess, the footage had unfortunately been taped over and the deputy was on vacation that week. Lawyer puts me on the stand, flat out asks me what happened. I responded from start to finish. He asked me what I blew at the jail. I said a .160. Judge then immediately tells the court reporter to strike that from the record and instructs jury to disregard any commentary or questioning from the previous 10 minutes. I literally incriminated myself without actually pleading guilty, just to catch a trooper in the act of destroying evidence that would have convicted me, just to catch the trooper in a lie. No matter what the judge told the jury, their minds were made up. I was a good kid, worked hard, loved mom and dad. The trooper was a lying bastard just out to ruin my life and had perjured himself on the stand to save his own ass. They were out for less than 15 minutes and came back with a not guilty verdict. Jury nullification at its best. Not a police officer, but a deceased friend was a genius criminal. In the 80s he used to steal high-value sports cars, but would specifically target Porsche 911s. There was a chop shop that he went into agreement with to deliver them the cars, and they would pay X amount per model. 911s brought him the highest dollar, especially if they had the keys with it. He went out and bought an old tow truck and made up some fake logo and company name that he painted on the sides of the truck to make it look like a legitimate fleet rig. He managed to get a copy of an invoice for a warranty repair job on a Porsche 911 from a Porsche dealership. He meticulously removed any identifying information about the vehicle or owner, and made dozens of copies of just the template with the dealership letterhead, logo, etc. He would find the car that he wanted to steal and wait for it to be driven somewhere the owner would be away for a half hour or so. He'd dress in coveralls and look and try to fit the job as best as possible. Just drive right up to the car, load it on the tow truck, and take off. 90% of the time nobody said anything or looked at him twice, probably just figured it was a repo. This was before internet or smartphones, so most people didn't know the company painted on the sides of the truck didn't exist. Where he got smart was with the invoices though. When he did get hassled, he was prepared. See, he would scout the car ahead of time and get the VIN and any other information he could possibly get. He'd have all the information printed on the dealership invoice, so it looked like the car was supposed to have some minor warranty repairs done. He'd show whoever was asking and say he had a call to come pick it up. Nobody ever pressed him on the issue, so he got a bit more ballsy after a few successful lifts. He knew he could get more money if he had the keys, but no way to get the keys without the owner knowing. Solution: valet. He started pulling up to valet stations, say he was there to pick up the car, show the invoice, and ask to go the car. If there was any pushback, he would get really aggressive and demand they call the owner and explain to them why their car isn't being fixed like they requested. Majority of the time, the valet staff didn't want to deal with any hassles, so they would just turn over the keys. Again, he'd pull up to the car and load it on the truck and be on his way, but now he had the keys and was making significantly more money on every car. He did this for several years until the chop shop was finally busted. He managed to not go down with the rest of the chop shop, moved out of town, and died a few years back before he was ever caught. TLDR. Friend used to steal Porsche 911s in the 80s by starting a fake towing company and drafting a fake invoice for repairs. Found out he could trick valet staff into giving him the keys to cars and started stealing cars out of valet for significantly more money. Not a cop, but the smartest criminal scammer I've heard of before this was Eli Sackey. Now many others may have pulled similar schemes, especially since this happened, but his case impressed me the most at the time. You can watch a TV program on it called Masterminds. Here he fancied himself an intelligent and sophisticated art dealer, and he knew which paintings he could sell for big money. He bought some paintings and secretly had an artist or artists create copies of them. Nothing illegal so far, but then he sold the copies pretending they were the real deal. He would trick the experts used to confirm the authenticity of a painting by using the real painting and then swapping the painting for the copy. He used his knowledge and connections to defraud multiple people with the same copies again and again in different countries with different languages, so they'd never cross paths and find out. With this money he could live the high-end art dealer lifestyle and buy even more paintings and establish even better connections. He was eventually discovered. It was only a matter of time, I suppose, since with the internet the art world could become more connected than before, and he was carrying out frauds using more and more valuable and famous works of art. In the end he had secretly kept all the real paintings for himself, because he truly did love them. Not a cop, but there is a good story about an old friend in a small town in Newfoundland. Small time stuff. There are big fines and penalties for breaking hunting laws. He used to fish illegally and catch lobsters out of season, and the game police were always trying to catch him, but they never could. One officer in particular was very keen on busting him. Well, one day, that particular officer caught up with him in the bay, and he had a few lobsters in his boat that he was not supposed to have. Well, the game officer was beaming. "I've got you now," was about what he said. My buddy, being the smartest, says, "What are you talking about?" The gaming cop says, "You've caught these lobsters. It's not season. You're going to get fined. We can seize your boat," and so on. So on the spot, my buddy says, "You're mistaking. I didn't catch these lobsters. They are my pets. They travel around with me all the time." Gaming cop says, "I don't believe. Just watch," my friend says. "I'll show you this trick they do. I put them on the beach. They run out into the bay. Then I call them, and they come right back to me." The game officer scratches his head for a second in disbelief and says, "Alright, go ahead. I want to see this." So my buddy takes the lobsters and puts them on the beach, and naturally they run into the water and swim away in the bay. The game officer looks at my buddy and says, "Okay, now, call them back." My buddy goes, "Call who back?" The game officer goes, "The lobsters." My buddy says, "What lobsters?" Not a cop, but saw this incident from the cops and perps POV hanging at my great grandparents' old farmhouse when I was quite young. The house was situated atop a hill with mostly open fields around. My teenage cousins and their friends were out on dirt bikes and likely up to no good, being the rowdy hillbillies that they were. My great grandmother, 85ish, and I were doing something or other in the yard when we hear the bikes coming towards us in the distance, but out of sight. What we do see, however, is a few squad cars barreling up the county road in cloud of dust. She uttered something indicating she recognized the connection between the two parties approaching. She quickly handed me an armload of fishing poles from the porch and told me to head for the pond out back. "Your cousins are idiots, but they are pretty smart too. They'll dump their bikes in the weeds on the other side of the dam. Just give them the poles and tell them to take their shirts off. Grandma said so." The boys dropped their bikes exactly like she said and came running towards the house. I followed Grandma's instructions and the boys obliged. She met the cops in the driveway, presumably lying for the miscreants and buying them a touch of time. A minute or two later, the cops came around the corner of the house to find the group of us fishing. The deputy, whom my family knew, was cursing up a storm and foaming at the mouth. "I know it was you little sheets. Where's the faking bikes?" and so on. As far as my 7 to 8-year-old judgment went, my cousins played it pretty cool and denied everything. Cops started saying they were going to have a look around for the bikes when Grandma stepped out of the back door wielding a shotgun. She politely suggested they be a bit nicer to the boys and informed them they would most certainly not be having a look around the property without a proper warrant. I did not know at this point what the officers did about my grandma, but they immediately acquiesced to her requests. Apparently a decade or so prior, she had fired at a deputy on her property who was trying to mediate a mineral rights dispute with some irate neighbors. Filled his thighs and stomach with a load of rock salt from a 12 gauge. Whatever crimes my cousins and their friends had committed was clearly not worth a shot to the midsection. They sulked off, swearing they'd catch them somehow. I don't remember what the hell they were being accused of, vandalism and/or theft probably. In this case, I suppose the actual criminals weren't the smart ones, but I sure thought their accomplice was. I suppose they were smart enough to run and hide under her skirt though. I'll certainly never forget the quickness and effortlessly with which she enacted her plan to cover for those idiots. I thought it was pretty damn smart. R.I.P. Nana. So, not a police officer, but a law student. In our criminal law class we studied a case about a brilliant criminal. It's State v. Bautista, 948p 2nd 1048, Hawaii 1997, for any of you interested. Basically, the guy would go into a fancy car dealership on Friday afternoons and buy an incredibly expensive car. He'd put down a small deposit in cash, around $100, then write them a bad check. He knew that the check wouldn't bounce until Monday or Tuesday. When they called the next week saying his check had bounced, he would apologize and return the car. Basically, he would get a fancy car to party in all weekend, then return it, all for $100. This happened repeatedly at different dealerships until they finally arrested him and tried to bring charges against him for theft, both for the theft of the car and the decrease in value of the car for taking it off the lot. Well, here's where it moves from clever to brilliant. See, in order to successfully charge someone with theft, the defendant needed the intent to permanently deprive someone of the property. This guy intended to return the car the following Monday. So guess what? They couldn't convict him for theft of the car. He didn't have the mens rea for theft. But the car still lost value from going off the lot, right? They could charge him with that. Well, the court basically said, look, you have no actual evidence that the car decreased in value. Car dealerships like to rip people off all the time. You could probably sell that car for the same value. It was just gone 2 days, and no damage was done to it. Guy got off scot-free. TLDR, brilliant criminal would write bad checks for a fancy car, party with it all weekend, then return the car the instant the check bounced. Due to how criminal codes are written, he couldn't be charged with theft. Not an officer, but the criminal was a friend of mine. He'd come out of juvie for breaking and entering with theft. First day out and back in school he was smug as fuck. Because he couldn't do his GCSEs, the school sent him to the local college a few times a week to start a BTEC. So first day in college this guy had stolen money out of everyone's coat that were hanging outside the canteen. He racked up a decent 300 GBP. So this little cuck with his new bag of tricks went into town and bought a brand new wallet. Picked up a few business cards, taxi cards, library card with no name on etc. He proceeded to trash the cards. Mud, drink on them etc. He changed some of the notes to coins and put the filthy ones in. He wrote £1,000 on some of the 10s and 20. Businesses do that here. He put 3/4 of the stolen money in said wallet. To top it off he put it in the mud and proceeded to walk over it a few times. Why did he do all this you ask? Because he took the wallet in its battered old condition to the local police station and handed it in, saying he found it on the path alongside the river to the college. By this point the missing money would have been reported, but even if they put 2 and 2 together the missing amounts wouldn't have been what was in the wallet. How did he caught you might ask? He boasted about it to about 70 people in our final year during lunch. Besides that would have gotten away with it and actually had the balls/locks to claim it back from the police a month later. Not for kids or possibly work/school. In a different life I was a correctional sergeant in lockup of mental health unit. There was an inmate who was gay and forced to deny it because of the homophobia in the system, even though so many of them engage in homoerotic activity. This guy had a terrible childhood living in a closet and being shamed from a drug-addled mother growing up. He ended up in an institution where he murdered an employee with a screwdriver to the neck a couple dozen times. All that being said, we are not talking about nice guys, we are talking about guys that played a smart hand. He fell in love with this new inmate and wanted to be his buddy. They don't have much to offer in that unit, but this crazy guy sent his peanut butter down to his new friend. They would be served peanut butter in a styrofoam cup with a lid like people use for coffee. This new guy sent back his magazines as a trade. A few months go by, and they have a lover's quarrel once new guy realizes crazy guy is in love with him lol. During the course of their argument he tells crazy guy how stupid he was this whole time because the cup of peanut butter was worth more than the old magazines, and he had gotten the best of him. Crazy guy says no, you definition got the best of me because I mixed my own nut butter in that cup of peanut butter before I sent it down to you. How did you like eating my cum for 3 months? Now that's gross, but it's pretty smart in a very crazy way. A young drug dealer had the sum of his money, $3,500, snagged in a large drug bust in St. Cloud MN in '92. There were 6 dealers involved, driving 4 vehicles. The 7th was an undercover police officer in a white Beretta. It was the height of the drug war, weed was the devil. On the way to the bust one of the cars broke down. The young dealer was asked to help get the broken one off the road. The others went ahead to the deal. The others would not be returning and were given 4 years. The young dealer had planned to move away from that shit town to go to college in Arizona. Now he had nothing and was trapped. The next day it was all over the local news. Police were looking for the remaining dealers at large. The young dealer had to get out point, so he borrowed $1,000 and drove to a Grateful Dead show at Soldier Field where he purchased 10 sheets of LSD for that 1,000 capable of turning into 7,000 in about 2 days. If he was caught it was life in prison for that much product. He returned to Street Cloud and was only able to sell half. The remaining 500 hits would still get life. That is when the aha moment happened. One of his childhood friends had been turned into an informant. Knowing the police would sacrifice a smaller quantity if they thought a larger bigger bust would happen after, he was confident they would do a deal. He called his former friend and offered the 500 hits at full price if he would agree to much larger quantity of 100 sheets on Friday, which was just 3 days away. He gave a meeting location with only one main way in and great visibility, so he could have to flush the drugs and waited. The informant met him and gave him the $3,500. He gave the informant the drugs and told him he will call him Thursday night with the location of the deal for the 10,000 doses. The informant asked him what else he was doing that day. The dealer told him, Nintendo and smoking weed, and turned and calmly walked in the front door to the apt building, like he was going inside. He bolted out the back door, ran through the woods to a friend's car, and took alleyways till he hit city limits, where his middle finger went out the top's fuck you. 3 days later he was in Arizona signing up for school. He never dealt drugs again. The police stole his money and he stole it back. That dealer was me. I finished school and went on to lead my field. Statute of limitations has long since passed. But lesson was simple. When a group of people think they are smart, do the thing they would never imagined. Play on their expectations and win. Not that smart, but quite clever nonetheless. University law student printed off a sheet ton of barcodes and stickers for low value items, cheap fruit, store brand cleaner, that sort of sheet. She stuck them onto high value meat items and used the self checkout. Got away with it for ages as the store couldn't work out where the items were going. They searched 2 hours of CCTV looking for someone concealing bacon, steaks, mince, chicken and leaving the store. They couldn't find anyone. Her downfall was when she got greedy and tried it with alcohol. Because the checkout's on-manned employee needs to verify that the person trying to buy the alcohol is over 18. The employee noticed that she was trying to put through a $50 bottle of wine as a $4 bottle of cider. He then checked through all the items and realized she replaced the barcodes on all of them with her own. I arrived and arrested her, and she was hysterically upset. The force I work for is all about prevention. It's very progressive, and it's been noted that sending people to prison doesn't necessarily change their behavior when they leave. So community restoration and alternative resolutions are quite big with my higher ups. So I arranged a meeting with her and her professor and the manager of the supermarket. This was her international national chain, so could swallow the cost shoplifting quite easily. It turns out she was pretty much top of the class in law school and had a promising career ahead of her. A dishonesty conviction would ruin her chances at a career. It was agreed that if she told the supermarket about every time she had been in and stolen something, an agreement would be made that she would give a certain amount of hours free labor which would correspond to the dollar value of the sheet had stolen. I've never looked her up since, but she should graduated by now. Edit. I auto-dictated this and have a strange accent, so I've corrected some grammar. The jewelry shop my cousin works at was robbed multiple times. No arrests. So, some gang will steal a heavy car, like an SUV or a Jeep or something, and just drive it through the window. In jump the gangsters and rob everything that's on display. Couple of fake calls to distract the police and give them additional time to get away. Drive off in another stolen vehicle, this time something like a family van or something. Inconspicuous. By the time the police start their work these guys have already split up, changed vehicles and dumped their stolen ride. And then they just leave and never come back to the country. This is what organized crime looks like today. The EU makes border hopping super easy. If you enter the EU over Poland or the Czech Republic, there's nothing to prevent you from driving straight through to Germany, France, or Spain. If you do everything right, you might not even show up as being in the country, because all you need is a couple of hours. The local ground crew cases the joints, but are never involved in the robbery, so you can't pin them for it. The actual crew retreats back east and then just works other countries. You do one job, then go to a different legal jurisdiction where no one is looking for you, and you do the next job there. Rinse and repeat. This way, the authorities have a hard time catching the crew. Minimal stay, minimal exposure, and even if they do, they can just pin the one thing on you. You're never on the hook for the other stuff because of jurisdictional BS. So a career criminal will only ever get the minimum sentence anyways, because it's their first crime in that jurisdiction, and they don't have to use any weapons. If you can even catch them, because of faked/passports. And the organization just needs to keep shuffling and juggling their crews. And because they use stolen cars, they rarely leave any traces. They have to be caught in the act, basically, or within minutes/hours of the crime, which raises the difficulty for the police to a whole nother level. The police will basically do their job, have their CSU check for any and all traces, and then they'll shrug their shoulders like hope somebody somewhere catches these guys, because we sure won't. One time in my town some guy came through in this shitty old Chevette, and he looked like a total dick. Think Trevor from Trailer Park Boys and Ted Nugent Love Child. He had expired out of province tags, so I pulled him over. He's wanted for several misdemeanors and failure to appear, so I haul him out, and he doesn't resist any further than calling me the quote fruitiest looking little queef he'd ever seen. Okay. So he's in the squad, and I'm going through his car, because he reeked of marijuana pre-legalization. I find this little plastic case that they put those toothpick things in, and it's full of these shitty little homemade lockpicks. Well fuck, I think to myself. I look back at my car and I see him, and this smartass is sitting on the front of my squad with handcuffs still on one wrist, not running off or anything, smirking at me, says I'm not resisting. I was so triggered, but at the same time I was totally amused by this total smartass. He knew he'd be getting arrested, so he wanted to try his lockpicks out, and slipped one into his knitted sweater, and to my shame and potential mortal danger, I didn't find the thing until after he'd used it. Just glad it wasn't a knife or needle. Anyway, yeah, the guy was like the hyena of the petty criminal world, and the biggest wisers I've ever arrested. Maybe not the smartest, but probably the most inventive was a major shoplifter I dealt with who had an identical twin who himself had only ever been in trouble a few times. Now this shoplifter was old school and experienced and knew how we worked. He would commit his crimes, and when he got caught he would pretend to be his twin. Pretty standard. But he knew everything about his twin, obviously all his personal details, but also addressed down to the color of the front door, his brother's wife and kids' personal details, jobs, daily routine, car driven, etc. We take notes of marks/scars/tattoos when people are arrested and in custody and take photos. This guy would even get someone to copy his brother's old bad hand and neck tattoos onto him with a marker pen. When stopped he was a nightmare. The amount of times he made fools of local cops pretending to be this brother. He even drove exactly the same shitty Toyota, same year and color, etc. He even had an answer machine at his house with a recording of a female pretending to be his brother's wife. Brilliantly inventive, he famously got busted stealing a sheetload of alcohol in a major supermarket, gave the attending cops the runaround with his brother's details only for his brother to pull up in his own sheet Toyota to do his weekly shop. I'm a paramedic. I was called to a police station to evaluate a subject/patient arrested on suspicion for driving under the influence. The guy's not drunk and belligerent, but you can tell he's been drinking, and an hour or two before he crashed his car into a curb. Very minor damage, nothing crazy. My limited understanding of the procedure: when you're stopped on suspicion of DUIs you can either blow into a breathalyzer or agree to have a sample of blood drawn and have the alcohol content measured. This guy agreed to have his blood drawn. Once his blood was drawn by someone else before I arrived, not me, they left the blood sample on the table in front of him while he is sitting in a chair and handcuffed. He stood up, fainted and smashed his head on the blood vials, ruining the samples. By now enough time had passed that if he blows into a breathalyzer it's going to show a lower, and possibly legal, amount of alcohol. Same thing if they drew another blood sample. I thought it was clever. The police were not amused. The joke was on him though. I told him that because he fainted after a car accident I was going to take him to a trauma center, which is extremely expensive and likely costs more than a DUI. I gave him a chance to confess that he faked the syncope and watched the gears turning as he thought about it. He stuck with his story though. Not a police officer, but I was impressed with the scheme of one of my employees when I was managing a movie theater. This guy would work the front box office on Friday and Saturday nights, and when adults would be paying in cash, he would tell them the price for adult tickets, which he knew, but on his computer he would charge them the amount for discounted tickets, military or senior. He kept a running total of the amount of extra money he had in his till. At the end of the night, the box workers would put all their money in a pneumatic tube and send it up through a tube system in the back of the box they were working in. This system was away from the cameras, so it was the perfect opportunity to pull the money out before sending it up to the accounting area. The guy made major money over a period of a couple months. This was over 10 years ago, when movie theaters were always packed, and you had movies like Twilight, Harry Potter, Inception, The Hangover etc. bringing in a consistent stream of teens who would be given cash from their parents to buy tickets. He eventually shared the method with his dumber friend who caused several refunds because of his ineptitude. When you have a large amount of 17 to 18-year-olds getting refunds for tickets designated for people aged 62 and up, eyes start to look at everyone working box. The first guy still hadn't raised any flags, but the second guy was caught and did some good old-fashioned finger pointing. Corporate and a rep from the MPAA came, fired both guys, and went through report after report and hours of footage to determine how much money was stolen. They settled on a figure in the $5,000 for the first guy range, which he paid with no hassle, and he moved on with his life with little consequence. From our perspective, this led everyone to believe the real figure was much higher. To put in a little perspective, on average each box worker would see about 1,500 customers during a night shift. If 40% of those customers paid in cash, which was typical because of the teens, he was getting 600 cash transactions and pocketing about $3 in straight cash per transaction. So $1,800 for just one weekend night. And this went on for months. Soon after this, it was discovered many people around the country were doing this, so policy company-wide changed, and new implementations made this virtually impossible. But still, that 20-ish-year-old guy made high-class stripper money for a long time with minimal effort. Not a police officer, but the criminal here, at a party underage drinking. I wasn't drinking much, maybe 2 beers. I go out front on the side, walk for a smoke. When the cops show up, I ask to leave, but they want me to take a breathalyzer to do so. If you breath a 0.02% while underage, you get a minor in possession charge. I ask, am I being detained? He says yes. Me, great. I'd like to remain silent until I speak to a lawyer. They handcuff me and start mocking me. I assume to intimidate the others they put me at the back of the line for breathalyzer, and I'm just sitting there, handcuffed. I gets to me, and they try to pressure me into taking the test. All my friends are doing the same, saying, dude, just do it. Stop being difficult. Bunch of cunts. The cops say they will charge me with refusal to blow. I explain that only applies in suspected drunk driving. In the state of Missouri, your body is considered a container and cops need a warrant or probable cause to search it. They have no reason to believe I'm not 21, no ID, and I was on the sidewalk, not in the house, so I wasn't at the party per se. They give me 24-hour hold, but all my friends got $100 charge and 12 hours of community service. I'm not a police officer, but my brother is, and he told me a story of this bank robber. The robber would go to the bank and watch through the windows every day. The police knew him and would ask what he was doing there, and he would just answer that he liked to watch on windows and buildings. No law against that, but would really watch the bank's chill and ways of doing things. And apparently, at the time, once a week the bank employees would count the contents of the vault. Because this takes a lot of time, and there is a time lock on the vault door, the workers would go to lunch with vault door still being open. One day, during the lunch break, the robber would go in and fill a bag with money and just drive away, the whole thing only taking about 5 minutes. After driving away, he would have another car somewhere, and he would leave the old car behind, making it harder for the police to find him. He had done this quite a few times, and some of those times he would get caught. Now, in Denmark there is a difference between theft and robbery. With a robbery, there needs to be a break of entry or a threat or the likes, and theft can maximum give 6 months of prison time. And because he just went inside and just took the money, it was considered theft and not robbery. He would then have stored the money away somewhere safe, do the 6 month, and collect his spoils after. Already posted one here about my brother and old roommate, but I'll post the other one I heard to cause it explains how they managed to get me a Dreamcast, a Gamma Boy, and PS2 1 year lol. So during the time the first Pokemon movie came out, where Burger King had those gold plated poke cards and the figures of the original general, my brother's friend offered him a part-time job to get a little more pocket change. So he took it up saying he could use the cash and knew I wanted the poke merchant he'd be able to get me the whole if he was working. Dude said why not. Well, one night a few months into the job his friend was closing. He went to our apartment after his shift one night. I was in the living room playing PS1 with him and roommate. He asked to talk to my brother privately. Suddenly he said he had to run an errand and would return shortly. Left me with his roommate and friend who played games with me. About an hour later we heard a clunk 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 clunk. They both ran outside and helped my brother pull in a dolly with a safe on it. They set it on the table. I asked about it, but he said it was for his comic book collection in case of a fire or burglary, and not to worry about it. So as a child I didn't think much on it obviously. A few years back, when I asked him how he got money affording an apartment for us, since I lived with him as a kid, and how he got me all the game stuff, and took me on fun trips on a tight budget. Apparently the budget wasn't tight as he told me about the rental store scheme in another post on here, and the story about this safe. Apparently his friend from back came over that night to tell him he forgot to lock up that night and that if they wanted a quick buck that'd be their chance. So he donned a mask, gloves, covered his body. So was identified on cameras. He went to open the safe to take its contents, but realized if he was seen using the combo on camera feed know it must have been an employee. So he looked around, found a dolly for unloading the shipments in the back, and slid the safe on it. Since we lived around the block from the back he'd only have to wheel half a block in the middle of the night. They opened it, that when I went to bed, and his cut 10 grams. That's how my older brother made sure he was able to spoil me that Christmas as a kid. It's weird now cause we both older, married, have kids our own, and I just learning these things from him and his friends now I'm old enough. But as a kid he took real good care of me and taught me better. The local Walmart thief. He would walk in with his young son and girlfriend. One of them would go screw with a display that had all the cameras on it until the alarm went off. Employees reset alarm. A bit later, one of the others in the group do the same. Process repeats. Eventually the employees think the alarm is broken and disable the alarm for the night. Later that night he walks over and steals everything on the camera display. They did this to several stores. Then they did a different scam of stealing stuff and just walking straight to the return counter, never leaving the store, and returned everything for gift cards. Next they figured out that after 11 PM one of the sets of doors entering the store were turned off. However, due to fire code, the doors had to be left unlocked, open 24 hours a day, so they would move all the cashiers closer to the other door, leaving the store with no one watching it. Fill up a shopping cart with TVs and computers, and then go to the doors that are turned off, give them a hard shove, and the will pop right open, and make the getaway. They got away with this for about 1.5 years, doing this almost nightly at several different locations. Police estimated they stole about $250,000 in electronics before getting caught. They spent all of the money on drugs, must have been some of the highest people in the area for that time frame. Not a police officer. Worked in a computer warehouse in the mid-90s while co-oping at college. We would build servers to customer order, install hardware/software plus apps, then ship them out. The warehouse also did catalog orders for large corporations. They were doing about $2 billion a year in revenue. Think 2K compact computers and 100 servers a day going through plus another 2K in components. Loss of product was higher than was acceptable, so they brought in a private company to search us on the way out daily for people stealing product. They were still losing a ton of merchandise after my co-op ended. I had made friends with some warehouse people through my classmate Matt whose buddy Mike worked in the warehouse. Fast 6 months I go over to Matt's house to pound bears and watch college basketball plus catch up. I ask him how Mike has been. He laughs uncontrollably on for a few minutes. He then says Mike has retired to Florida on the money he made stealing stuff from the business. He told me what Mike had been doing for the last 18 months he worked there was walking each day with 15 to 20 pre-printed up stickers. He would pick stuff out he could sell at computer swap shows and would slap a ups label sticker with his PO box he rented on the computer parts. Take them to Outgoing, put them on a pallet, and wrap them for ups to pick up. He would then go pick up the previous day's stuff after work daily. Not a cop, but I worked in a bar in college and a guy put himself through a law school creeping on women in bars and clubs. The woman complained to multiple employees. So in my bar, my manager asked me to help him leave because I'm a big dude and worked door checking IDs. So manager asked him to leave politely 3 times and he refused. So the manager said, we don't want you here and we are kicking you out. He grabbed his arm and I grabbed the other. He of course tried to get loose and started swearing and calling us names. He swung his elbow and hit me in face. Nobody punched him because there was policy that rewarded us $100 not to hit someone that hits you. We got him outside only by carrying him with 4 employees. When we let him go, the guy did an end zone dance. Turns out this guy was going through a law school suing bars by acting like a jerk and refusing to leave, berating customers and employees. The guy carried a recording device on him recording only his struggles, not the politely being asked or his swearing. He had settled out of court over 12 times in 1 year, putting himself through a law school. We went to court and the judge said it doesn't matter what he did in other bars and cases, you can't physical accost a customer. The judge would not allow the other cases to be told to jury. It was a 3-day jury trial. My manager had to give him $125K. The corporation wouldn't reimburse him. I had to testify and told them he hit me and made the $100 for not hitting back. His lawyer told the jury that he was defending himself and I said he verbally accosted 4 women, hits me, I don't hit him and that's self-defense. His attorney asked judge to strike it from record and judge told jury to disregard. Not a police officer, but was on jury for someone working at a fast food place who had a pretty good money making scheme going. He was a lower level manager and had access to modify receipts after hours. He also knew local and regional management were a bunch of clueless nitwits when it came to technology and never checked logs or monthly stats. So what this person did was every night, right before closing, he'd go in and modify a bunch of orders with real active coupon codes to discount orders for things like $1 off an ice cream or $2 off a hamburger, whatever. He'd then pocket the difference in cash before putting the everything in the safe for the night. Superficially, the books always checked out when the upper management counted and compared to the register receipts. This was going on for months, and he pocketed several thousand in cash before they hired a younger by the book manager who started going through and auditing all of the logs and seeing up to 50 receipts a night modified to add coupons hours after the original transaction. The dirty manager would also be going in on his off nights under the guise of helping new hires off the clock as his ID badge was being scanned before each night's activities. Another new manager hire, who was trying to learn everything about the job, had caught him making the changes, but had no idea at the time what he was doing, and he brushed it off as upper level stuff she shouldn't be concerned with. If she had known, she could have saved the business a lot of money if she would have reported it when she caught it. We had an interesting group working for a while that basically goes like this. Guy calls up the cops and says he's out walking his dog and saw someone forcing a window open to get into a house. Police arrive. Guy plays a role of helpful citizen and leads them around to the back of the house. Sure enough, there is a window / patio door / whatever forced open. Guy talks about seeing movement in the curtains upstairs when he was calling, etc. Officers draw their weapons and start clearing the upstairs. Guy slips into the house, pockets some small but valuable things. He's calling this on giant homes in expense parts of SoCal, Greater Los Angeles region and San Diego. In the 1990s when everyone is wearing cargo shorts and stuff. So now he has some nice stuff swiped off a mantle, out of some display cabinet, or whatever in his pockets. Officers come down. No one was upstairs, of course. Must have been the wind or something. Guy is back outside holding his dog's leash by this point, looking like a model citizen. Dude got busted by the insurance companies. He was careful never to interact with the same police department too many times, and the PDs didn't have linked databases smart enough to cross-reference to that level of detail set up. He stole from too many homes insured by the same insurance company though, and one of their auditors finally noticed the trend of just a few small high-value items missing, and the same story on every police report. They put the word out, and 3 weeks later he did it again, and this time got patted down, and sure enough he had stuff in his pockets. No funk. Pretty controversial and very smart dude in Germany. He planted a small bomb in a KaDeWe department store in West Berlin and phoned from East Berlin. Still very different areas. East Berlin's infrastructure and police service is often not connected to the Western equivalents. He successfully extorted 500,000 Deutschmarks. He returned to extortion in 1992, having spent the money placing a bomb in Karstadt in Hamburg. He set up a complex money transfer scheme with a box attached magnetically to a train. In August, he escaped with the box, but it contained only a few hundred marks, otherwise being filled with scraps of paper. He continued to target Karstadt stores through 1993 and 1994, but did not obtain any further money. One of his bombs did $4.5 million in damage in the sporting section of KaDeWe, Germany's largest department store. For 6 years, the extortionist, who had started calling himself Dagobert after the German name for Scrooge McDuck, baffled police and entertained the general public. Due to his careful precision and effort to eliminate any chance of anybody being hurt in his attacks, he was seen as a harmless prankster by many, and I'm Dagobert t-shirt sales were brisk at kiosks throughout the city. When police released a tape of his voice in an attempt to trace him, a music group mixed it into a rap song dedicated to Dagobert. During his later trial, he would explain that he wanted to be like the Disney character and swim in money. To collect his blackmail payments, he would devise intricate mechanical devices that would speed along railroad tracks, have false bottoms, and he continued to elude detection, though he barely eluded capture at the last minute several times, including once when a pursuing detective slipped on wet leaves and fell. Copied from Wikipedia. Not the smartest, because that's still going to trial. But my introduction into smart criminals. So, I'd been on the street of a small Illinois town of 150,000 metro population for about a year by myself. One of my best friends had been killed by a drunk driver as a teenager, so DUIs were my thing, and I got several awards for it. Then, the day came. I'm just outside a college campus starting my shift looking for some drunk people to stop leaving the bars around midnight. Then it happens, a black Pontiac blows a red as I'm crossing the intersection. I dodge the collision and get behind him, lighting him up, calling out the stop. He drives 12 or so blocks to his house before he stops in his drive. I get out and get on the PA telling him to keep his hands visible and to shut off the car. I'm waiting for some additional officers in case he fights or runs. I have him step out, felony stop style, and hook him, but was stumbling the entire time walking back to me. He gets to me smelling like a brewery and weed. This is January in the Midwest, so you know it's cold out. The perp opts for a ride back to the PD to do field testing. He fails upon arrival, and a coworker says he found some crack and weed in the car before the tow. I notify him. He's under arrest for DUI combo and possession of a controlled substance. The perp looks at me and says, I ain't going jail, motherfucker. What you want? While I'm filling out his tickets, I jokingly say 3 kilos of cocaine, and he says, give me my phone. I call a vice guy in, and we set up a buy that same night, and no sheet 3 kilos of coke show up. Nevertheless, I've never seen one key at this point in my career, and this guy just flips for a $5 grand DUI. We went 2 dealers above him before we finished the investigation and got a lot of coke, heroin, and meth over the next 6 months, building the case. Needless to say, the DUI perp walked no questions asked, and we seized a lot of money and drugs due to this. Edit. This led to me getting into drug and gang patrol, which I got burnt out on. I left the force for a more profitable career a few years later. I was a correctional officer many years ago and met a guy who told me he had watched an episode of Nightlife NBC or something like that, which was basically a 60-minute special on scams and how they work and who they work on. So this guy watches the piece on making counterfeit money, joys down the gist, and then jumps on the show's website to fill in the details that the show didn't air because people like this guy exist. So now he has basically everything he needs to know, buys everything he needs materials wise, and goes on to make millions of dollars in fake money. He gave me some details such as using an easy bake-over oven cleaner to strip dollar bills of their paint/chemicals, and explains that he pretty much just inkjet printed $100 bills on $1 bills. Made a ton of it. Then went on to explain how I met him in the prison. Basically, he explained that each bill has its own serial number, and he was mindful to not make too many duplicates. He said he was always steps ahead of the Secret Service, but made a stop at a hotel and was low on loot, was rolling the dice, and used bills with matching serials hoping to make it out the next day and keep the SS behind him as usual. Well, it didn't work. They were gaining on him apparently, and when the counter clerk noticed the duplicate numbers, made a call and they swooped in. Said they were trailing him for a long time and could never get close, but knew he might slip up eventually. He sure did. Was a great guy aside from the criminal mindset. One of my favorite stories as well. Blah blah, not a cop, but here's a good one. I'll try to give my best recount. So the thieving starts when 4 people open a bank account at RCBC in Manila, Philippines and deposit $500. The bank is located on Jupiter Street. Fast forward 6 months to the Bangladesh Central Bank. It's a Thursday and the bank has just shut down for the weekend, since free/sat is weekend there. After the bank closes, 35 ICE transfers totaling near $1 billion are sent to the Federal Reserve in New York City, where Bangladesh had an account for international payments. Now nearly $1 billion has been wired out to various accounts in multiple countries. Friday the Fed begins processing the payments, but some are flagged because the word Jupiter, the street of the RCBC, is the name of a shipping company blacklisted for Iranian sanctions. 30 transfers are halted. Now we are down to $101 mil. But one of the transfers has been flagged in Sri Lanka, $20 mil to the Shalika Foundation. Yes, my spelling is right. This was flagged as $20 mil as alert for a NGO, so it was sent back to Deutsche Bank and stopped due to the fake and misspelled foundation. Sunday the Bangladesh employees return, where they find their printer that prints all transactions is broken. Once they fix it, they realize that $1 billion is gone and panic ensues. They try contacting the New York City Fed, but it's Sunday, no one's there. Monday the Fed has received the stop order and sent it to RCBC in the Philippines. Oh, it's Chinese New Year and no one is working. The money was withdrawn the previous day and taken to casinos, where it was turned into chips. Therefore untraceable. 2 Chinese men were identified, but escaped to Macau before they could be apprehended. Now let's rewind back to a month before. A virus was sent via email to an employee which granted the hackers access to the bank and its SWIFT account. They then proceeded to send out the transfers on a Thursday after close and made sure the printer would malfunction. Eventually, a cybersecurity team was able to identify the code that was used, and it drew shockingly similar comparisons to many other heists around the world. As they dug even deeper, they found an IP address tracing back to NK, which was accessed at some point, and some of the language was also in NK. Not a cop, and this story is more about the stupidest authority figures who couldn't catch, or were bothered to catch, an easy criminal. In 5th grade, I fell in with an older kid back when UGR cards just became a big thing. He taught me how to go to this store, take a pack of cards off the rack, and walk around looking at other merchandise while opening the pack in our pockets. Then we'd dump the packs and walk out with the cards. He got overzealous and tried doing a few packs at once, but forgot one in a cargo pocket. The alarm went off, and he got surrounded by a worker or two and a manager, I guess. I was too young to know who was what. They were just all adults to me, but I assume at least one was a manager. He fed them some bullshit story about how his credit card has a weird habit of setting off store alarms because of the mag strip, and to prove it, waved his wallet in front of the scanners, those alarm things on either side of the door of department stores. But at the same time that he did it, he bent his knee forward, so it went through, and the cards in his cargo pocket set off the alarm again, making it look like it was the wallet. They let him go. I watched the whole thing from outside, and he told me afterwards. I was in 5th grade and thought adults were just stupid. Now that I'm one, I realize they probably just didn't care enough to search him or call the cops. They did start keeping UGR cards and a few other brands at the register though, lol. Another time in high school, a friend of mine bought 1 can of cheap spray paint and 4 cans of good spray paint at Walmart. He used the self-checkout and scanned the cheap one 5 times, but bagged the good ones, so he only paid for 5 cheap ones and got 4 good ones instead. When the alarm went off, he told the greeter/receipt checker that he bought and paid for 5 cans. Apparently they only looked at the receipt, counted 5 cans, and chalked it off as a technical issue without looking at the actual cans. Not a cop, like most posting here. I knew a guy who, in the mid-late 90s, did a decent little scam involving Magic: The Gathering, which was quite popular at the time. At this time, you could go into Toys R Us and other large toy/department stores and find booster pack dispensers mounted on the edges of shelves. Intent was that you'd pull out a few packs, then go pay for them. Instead, his group would load up their large coats with as many packs as they could stuff in. They'd already done the work of figuring out where cameras were, how to distract staff and security, and see. Then they'd unload it all in the car, tossing low-value cards on the floor. Each booster pack has an own ratio of low/medium/high value cards, and keeping the good ones while heading to the next store in the region. When it got too difficult to wade through, they'd stop to toss the chaff in a dumpster. After a day's work, they'd head home and build amazing powerful decks with all the free cards, then go into tournaments and win tons of cash and prizes. Some of them were also very skilled players. Occasionally would sell big binders of cards, individual ultra rares, even winning tournament decks to aspiring players. Last I heard, they all quit once they turned 18, except one guy who got caught and then tried as an adult. White collar incident I dealt with almost 20 years ago now. Happened at an IT and software development company that was mismanaged to the nines by a team of completely callous and aloof business-minded middle managers who actually knew jack shit about tech in general. They would make outrageous requests to staff members, always asking them to come in on weekends. So saying that employee morale was low would be a huge understatement. Unable to comprehend why company output was so lackluster, combined with down spiraling profits, lead them to believe that employee layoffs were the only answer. To rub salt in everyone's wounds even more, they hired an outside consulting firm to manage the layoffs. A completely impersonal, and in the end, ineffective move that would eventually be the downfall of the entire company. This pushed 3 individuals to the brink of their sanity. While drowning their sorrows one night, one of the men, an IT expert, revealed that he could sneak a virus into the company's accounting system, which would siphon off a small fraction of each financial transaction processed through the company's infrastructure. The amount was minute enough to not raise any red flags to any who would be savvy to their crime. Another one of the men, who somehow garnered a promotion on recommendation from the consultants, was able to use his newfound security access to plant the virus. The heist actually went swimmingly, and the 3 were ready to kick back and soak it in. The 3 even celebrated by destroying some faulty office equipment which had constantly plagued their work week. After a quick check of the ghost account they had set up to deposit the funds, the IT whiz discovered he had messed up some of the code in the virus, and it was siphoning way more money than they had intended. This of course set off all the alarms at the company as almost $300,000 was missing from the books in only a matter of days. One of the men, the mastermind who had received the inexplicable promotion and actually planted the virus, was going to accept culpability for the crime. When he had arrived at the office, it was totally engulfed in flames. Turns out another employee, somewhat mentally deficient but equally disgruntled, had also reached his boiling point and had lit the building on fire the night before. The 3 perpetrators got away scot-free and there still have been no arrests to this day. They actually made a documentary about this whole plight that I highly recommend. Not a cop, but an old friend of mine. We were friends around 12ish and stopped hanging out around 15 when he started smoking weed and I didn't want to associate myself with that crowd. Well, a good thing I didn't, because the group of dickheads he hanged out with started calling themselves a gang and did various sorts of illegal stuff I didn't want to get involved in. One of the things was this. They'd go to a store selling expensive shoes, and as you probably know only one of the pair of shoes is put on the displays at most stores to avoid theft. Well, he'd take the exact one on the display and ask for it in the size it was there. After trying to putting on, fiddling with it, or just anything to waste time until the staff member went away, he'd take the other shoe. Let's say the shop had the right one displayed. He'd take the left one from the box, hide it in his bag and quickly leave. This was the sneaky part of the plan. Now he has a left shoe. The staff member probably didn't bother to check the box, and he got away. He'd go into another store, and since the shoes on display are the right ones, he'd take one assuming it was the right size and either sneakily leave or just run. That when he'd have a right and left shoes, making a pair and sell them for £70 and up. They were a group of 8, and they'd strategically do it on different days over the course of the month. They could do around 20 to 30 pairs of shoes, traveling and going to different locations, and since they're 8 people, sending different people in, they could easily make around £3,000 a month altogether without getting caught. I'm not a cop, but I have a story of a cunning heist that was well planned, but foiled by a poor exit strategy. At the time I was working for a big box retailer as a department manager, and the criminals broke into our store. Break-ins were not unusual, so stores were equipped with P sensors, door sensors, smash sensors and disorientation alarms throughout. I tell this story in exacting detail as it was all captured on CCTV. The heist in question seemed well planned to work around many of the security measures. 3 criminals removed bolts on a roof panel, lifting off the roof, peeling back the insulation, and shimmying down some internal pipe work. It was a warehouse style store, so all the P sensors were mounted on cable trays about 10 feet off the ground, hinging from the ceiling. The criminals used the cable trays to move around above the shop floor without tripping the sensors, and then, when they were ready, dropped down directly over the high-value glass cabinets, targeting smartphones and iPods. They had glass smash hammers and simply smashed all the glass, shoveling the goods off the shelf into large plastic bags. Naturally though, by this time they had set off the P sensors and the internal alarm was sounding. They decided to make a run for it, but instead of heading for the nearby fire exit they headed to the back of the store. At the back there were 2 fire exits, a locked door that led to the loading dock, an unlocked staff room door which had a fire exit sign, and a glass window that looked into the staff room. They tried the locked door, glanced at the unlocked staff room door, but instead smashed the glass window, climbing through to get into the staff room. In this process they had torn some of their bags and stock was spilling out of them onto the floor. They desperately tried to hold the bags together and make their escape. In the staff room they looked for an exit, but even standing at an emergency exit with alarms already blaring, did not use the exit door. This part of the store had a floating ceiling, so for whatever reason they pushed in several floating ceiling tiles and climbed into the ceiling with their bags. A few minutes pass on the CCTV, then on the footage of the adjacent dock area you see one of the criminals kicking through a plasterboard wall about 12 feet off the ground. They make a hole large enough to climb through, and clearly desperate to make an escape, abandon their bags of stolen goods in the ceiling space, jumping cautiously down into the loading dock. By this time the security company has arrived at the premises, but are only around the front of the store. It's unclear if the criminals had a lookout, but more desperate to escape than ever they now use the 5th fire escape they come to, throwing the door open and running down the alley behind the building into darkness. It's still unclear to me, to this day, why these criminals didn't opt to use any of the conveniently available fire exits along their path. They had clearly scoped out the building beforehand and all the exits were well covered from sight from nearby roads, etc. When the police came to investigate though, they discovered the stupidest mistake of all. In the ceiling space above the staff room they found a used phone with SIM card amongst the new ones that had spilled out of the bags. A few days later they called in on the owner of the phone. He was arrested after they found he still had plasterboard on one set of boots and had a pry bar and glass hammer in the boot of this car. He later admitted to the crime, incriminated the other 2 individuals, and pleaded for a reduced sentence. To this day, I'm unsure why this masterful entry plan was not paired with an equally masterful exit plan, but the CCTV footage of 3 confused men trying to escape directly next to a fire exit was always a good laugh. TLDR. 3 guys break into an electronics store in a planned out, well-coordinated way, and then seem to forget how to escape. Not a cop, but had a friend who tried to get me in on a steal. I turned it down because his plan seemed stupid. He switched me for another friend of mine, and the whole thing worked like a charm. He was an overpass guard at a relatively large tech company. He had been doing the job for 5-ish years, and was about a month from quitting. He had always done the job by himself, and therefore had time to snoop around all by himself. He found the accountant's office and somehow discovered that they often left $75,000 in hard cash in a drawer for pickup later in the week. And it always varied by a few dollars. So one day, he realizes that there are no cameras in that office. And he's supposed to go in and check the room anyways. So when he goes in, he takes a couple $100. And nobody said anything because the company makes enough money that it's barely noticeable. He did this a few more times before getting an idea. One part of his job was driving over to another company midway through the night and checking it out. So this is where it gets interesting. He leaves one night to check the other building, checks it, and goes to get McDonald's. That part is important. The other friend smashes a window to get into the cameraless room and takes all $75K. The alarms go off, but he gets out in time because the person who is supposed to show up and check the alarm is, and you guessed it, my friend the security guard. He was seen on camera checking the other building as well as at McDonald's. So he isn't charged with anything, and the company writes off the money because he technically didn't do anything wrong, and the security company has to save face. They fire my friend, and he gets a severance package worth $25K. For those of you keeping score, they're up $100K. The security company needs to hire a new person. Who do they hire? The guy who broke in the first time. They watch the place for another month or two, and when they are certain that the tech company didn't bother to update their camera systems or anything, they repeat the job again, just switching roles. All in all, they earned about $190,000 by the end of this. Since they faked up boo telling me at the beginning, they gave me $10K to not tell anyone. Not that it mattered. I'm pretty sure they have never spoken to each other again, and they blew all the money anyways. So now I'm telling Reddit. I worked for a manufacturing company that was on the edge of a big, really shitty hood in a sleepy little southern town. We had cars broken into several times, people trying to sell dope in the parking lot, things like that. Place was big, like several 100,000 square feet, so there were 2 golf carts for the managers at the front to use to move around the plant. Place was fully shut every weekend. Anyway, came in Monday. It was after a predicted pattern of really heavy rain for the whole weekend, and someone had cut the main power to the plant. Rain had caused power outages around town, then broken. Nope, the company did not have an alarm that went off when this happened. This was in the 80s. They broke into the maintenance cage and took crowbars, duct tape, and a couple of flashlights, and the keys to the golf carts. Taping the flashlights to the carts, they used the crowbars to break into every locker, toolbox, and office, taking anything and everything of value, tools and measuring equipment, electronics, office supplies, people's coats and clothes, literally anything and everything of value in the place. Once the carts were fully loaded, they had opened a roll-up door and drove them off. Cops found a site about 1/4 mile away with golf cart tracks and truck tracks. So it appeared that the thieves loaded their stuff into a large truck, then came back for more. Cops even think they did it over several days, because I mean nothing was left in the way of tools or items of value. They even broke the glass on the vending machines and emptied them too. And no one was ever caught. Not a cop, but I once read a story about a guy who defrauded a commercial real estate development company by posing as an authorized agent of the company's largest creditor. The company was in default on a substantial loan from this creditor, and the creditor was based in another country. I'm leaving some technical details out, but the guy successfully caused the company to assign interests in the properties over to him. He fraudulently induced the owner of the company to assign his shares of the company to him, sold the supposed interests in the properties to various partners in crime, then clandestinely brought lawsuits purportedly on behalf of the company and foreign creditor, using equally shady lawyers against the new assignees to rescind the transactions based on fraud, quickly reaching a settlement after filing that left the properties with the assignees in exchange for more money. By the time all of it was unraveled, figured out, and the true owner of the company sued to rescind everything. The guy had spent or hidden the millions of dollars he obtained, and the new assignees were able to successfully obtain dismissal of the cases on statute of limitations grounds filed by the company to rescind the transactions by showing the company had sued them for the exact same thing several years before, thus keeping the properties. The foreign creditor also never recovered any money or the properties. As far as I know, no law enforcement agency was interested in investigating any of this, despite someone fraudulently pilfering millions of dollars of real estate and even using the courts as a tool to prevent any recourse by the real victims. Another friend and another car theft story. God, I have terrible friends. I had this friend in high school. Let's call him Mike. Mike's parents bought his a brand new Jeep Wrangler and Mike was not a responsible person in even the slightest. One day leaving a party, Mike rolled his Jeep driving home drunk. When I say rolled, I really mean he flipped the Jeep on its passenger's side, and not a complete rollover. He managed to walk away unharmed, but the passenger side and roof of the Jeep were toast. He had a friend come pick him up off the side of the road and they used a winch to flip the Jeep back on the tires and towed it to his house. He lived in a rural area on about 50 acres or so with plenty of area to hide the Jeep. Mike knows his life is pretty much over when he wakes up in the morning and has no idea what to do. Couple hours later, he comes up with the brilliant idea to steal a Jeep and try to pass it off as his own. There was an almost identical Jeep at a car lot in town with the only difference being it was an automatic and his was a stick shift. Same color, same engine, same options, etc. He goes back that night and steals the Jeep out of the lot and takes it to where his Jeep was stashed. Him and his friend take the windshield, VIN plate and driver door off the new Jeep and swap it with the VIN plate and door off his old Jeep. Didn't have fuel injection so there were no worries about the computer or electronics. They rekeyed the ignition and doors so that his old keys and spare set would work on the stolen Jeep. The only difference you could tell was that it was an automatic instead of a stick shift. Whether other people would ask and say I thought it was a manual, he'd like and tell them he had it converted. No idea how his parents never knew, or if they did, and kept it to themselves, but either way, he got away with it, and even sold the Jeep years later without issue. As for the old Jeep, they eventually tore most of it down, and hauled it into the middle of nowhere and dumped it. Where they went, people abandoned cars and old junk all the time, so it was nothing out of the ordinary. Several years later, and after he had already sold the stolen Jeep, there was a cleanup out where they dumped the wrecked Jeep where all the abandoned cars and other junk were flown out with helicopters. Never heard anything about the Jeep after that. I had a very close relative that was in law enforcement for well over 30 years. He once told me about this cat burglar that was never caught until one car chase that ended his career. So this man was well known in his neighborhood for being the guy who walked 2 to 3 times per day everywhere in his small town. Look out the window and you'd likely see him on a stroll. He'd leave for a few days every now and then and return to his walking schedule. Or he'd leave and rush to get to his next walk. Yet no one ever put 2 and 2 together to figure out that when he was away, some place got burgled. Some of his burglaries were very high profile and on national news. Forward a few years and he's under suspicion due to some neighboring business new security camera. Back then security cameras weren't popular and weren't the best quality. Even fewer came with backup systems to keep footage. The authorities questioned him and figured out he might be their guy. My relative was assigned to check all this out and see if they could catch him. But he was never found nearby the burglaries and was always at home by the time they checked his house. He was from such a small town that if they parked a car on the street to watch the guy's house, everyone would know who it was. There was no way they could watch the guy's house 24/7. So they rented a room in a house nearby, but couldn't get anything closer for a better view. The guy could sneak out one side of his house from a few windows. Turns out this is what the cat burglar did, because he knew damn well they were after him. So he started leaving notes basically telling the authorities how stupid they were, etc. My relative said one of the notes was basically a pin-up poster, a la the 50s pin-ups, with a note saying something like at least they could enjoy looking at the pin-up, since they couldn't get their eyes on anything else, lol. So like 2 decades later they finally catch him leaving a place with new cameras and increased staff to help get him. They start chasing him and the cat burglar almost got away, except he crashed the car into a power pole. He was ejected from the car, wasn't wearing a seatbelt, and he broke through the windshield hitting the pole straight on. He wound up unable to walk for about a decade afterward. He couldn't remember anything, had no short-term memory, and no hand-eye coordination. As well, he lost sight in one eye, lost use of his fingers on one hand, and never again stood up straight. He was released after a few years of prison on good behavior, on that one burglary. Over the course of 2 decades they figured out that he burgled a place every few months, about 2 to 3 a year. Often he would take just 1 or 2 things and none of the stolen property was ever recovered. So 10 years after the accident he started walking the neighborhoods again, but this time had a young woman with him. My relative said they watched the two for a few years and suspected he'd been teaching this woman, but never pinned anything on her. Crazy. TLDR. Super cat burglar wasn't caught over 2 decades of burglaries. Gets seen leaving a building with stolen property, and big car chase ensues. It ended with him crashing his car into a power pole and survives, but without the capacity to do much at all for the remainder of his life. He was never tried or convicted of all of his burglaries. Edit. Spelling. A word. Not sure if he was the smartest criminal, but this hustle always stuck in my memory. This guy was doing life in prison for something else, but he used to transport pounds of weed in a really slick way. He'd buy a broke down Pose car that couldn't run with cash, never turned in any paperwork to the DMV. He'd load all the weed into side panels, seeds, etc. effectively hiding it from view within the car and sealing all his packaging to be as smell proof as possible. He'd use his AAA insurance, which allows a once-a-year tow up to a certain amount of miles. He'd transport all of his crops from one part of the state to the other, and he'd use AAA to do it. If the car was ever stopped, which, why would it be, it's just some junker being towed on a flatbed by police while in transit, it would be damn near impossible to prove that he hid the weed in the car unless he admitted to doing it. Sure, he'd lose the weed in the car and the cops would look at him real hard, but no way could they tie it to him. He wasn't transporting the car wasn't even being driven on road, and the car wasn't in his name, just some junker he bought for cash. It's his name on the insurance, but whatever, there was no way to prove he put the weed in the car. Told me he did this for years, never caught for it. I always thought that kid Maximum Wade was on some next level shit. He's the teen that stole Guy Fieri's Lamborghini, rappelled down from the roof of the dealership service center if I recall, hid it in a storage rental place, where he also had a former cop car painted and marked as a legit car, and police officer and sheriff uniforms I believe. Apparently had been pulling scams using the uniforms. He was caught after trying to murder his ex-girlfriend's new boyfriend. He pulled up to them while parked in front of her house on an all-black street bike, all black outfit, and unloaded a shotgun through the guy's door and sped away. Took quite a bit of detective work to catch him. When he was being held, the facility was attacked. Apparently his boys came through and blew a hole in the jail wall to try to extract him, but he was unable to escape. I don't recall if they were caught. They may have been. The heist he was planning, before he got caught, was to rob a large SF jewelry store. That's what the PD/sheriff uniforms were all for. They were to cause a small explosion at the entry to the mall, in/near a garbage can. As expected, police would be called. This is where they would run into the jewelry store to help secure it, then lock it down, and rob the place during the chaos. Meanwhile, homeboy flies in a chopper and the accomplices all climb up and they escape. From what I recall, they already had the chopper/airfield picked out, and I believe the kid had already taken, or was taking flying lessons. Something to that extent. Been a while since I read up on him, but damn, kid had quite the imagination and apparent skill set. Now he's locked away. Not a cop. About 15 years ago in Melbourne, I was working for an Apple licensed store before Apple opened their own stores in Australia. A guy came in and wanted to buy a Mac and an iPod with a credit card. The employee on the floor rang me and said that for some reason the card is not going through the FPOS terminal. I came down and tried it. When the card was swiped, the message on the terminal read, "Insert the card into smart card slot." Thing is, the card did not have a smart chip on it. The banks in Australia just started introducing the smart chips, and not all cards had them yet. I asked the guy for ID and he showed me other cards with his name and driver's license with the same name. I told him to contact his bank. After the guy left, I rang the bank, and they told me that it had to be a fake card. Few weeks later my friend who was a cop told me about a gang working in a casino across the road. They would walk around and spot people who were losing a lot of money. They would then offer them to make up their losses by buying high value items with fake cards. They would melt the stolen credit card numbers onto blank cards. They would also create fake IDs. Don't know if they were ever caught. Not a police officer. There was a series of burglaries by what the police thought were the same group of people in Southern California in 2012 to 2013. They would wait until after midnight and break into cell phone stores by cutting holes in the roofs. They realized that the inventory rooms of such stores would be extremely hard to break into most of time, except through the roof where their no alarm systems were installed. They would wear gloves and masks and work as a team. In many cases they would get away with $50,000 to $300,000 worth of product, mostly iPhones, Samsung Note/Galaxy, iPads, LG. They presumably had a bulk buyer in a foreign country, since the phones weren't pinging on networks they were stolen from. Latin/South America was thought most likely due to the geographical location of California. I was a manager of a store where they rappelled down a hole, cut in a 3-story building, and crawled above the ceiling until they found the inventory room. They then helped themselves and would haul it back up through the ceiling. They were patient, had them on camera for nearly 3 hours. An alarm was accidentally tripped when they knocked a ceiling tile down in another room that had a motion sensor alarm. It was months and dozen more burglaries before I heard arrests had been made. Obligatory not a cop, but I was part of 2 groups. It was a pretty petty crime, DUI, no license, for the first story. Second story was no license. I don't know if it's still the case, but my old motorcycling group used to do learner rides together. On these learner rides, you'd have 30 plus motorcyclists all riding in formation, generally behaving themselves, clocking up the right time and hours needed to pass the test successfully. Most of the time you'd have 30 guys learning from the same 2 to 3 instructors, so everyone behaved the same way, and it was generally pretty safe. Story 1. Stony was leading the ride at the very front. She's a pretty experienced middle-aged rider and was leading a very well-planned group of 57 people. We were riding on one of the highways when we get pulled over for a random breath test. Stony takes a full 5 minutes to remove her gear, do the breath test, then move out of the way. The next guy following her waits until the officer comes over to him before he starts taking off his gear and did the exact same thing. The guy following started to do it when the sergeant asked what the hell was the hold up, saw what was happening, and waved all 57 riders through, including 4 that were over the legal limit and 2 to 3 that didn't have a license. I remember being about 6th person back from the front and watching this, trying hard not to laugh, thank you full face helmet, and noting that for future reference. I remember one of the guys who had too much to drink eventually got his bike impounded for something else, giving correlation evidence to the idea that criminals aren't that smart. Story 2. I was leading an open invite learner ride to a country town. It was a stay together ride, which generally means no speeding, no dropping riders, and everyone has endorsements, with 12 or 13 riders. We had a map to a country town, a planned lunch spot, and then we'd ride back to a designated point. The ride there is fine. We go into the only place for lunch, a pub, and have lunch there for an hour and a half. We get on our motorcycles, start to ride and make it maybe a few hundred feet to the nearest intersection, where we realize the local police have completely blockaded the 4 roads out of town. Country town, bored cops, makes sense. We can't do anything, so I indicate that we are riding down one of the roads and to pull over. The cops start to walk over, and when they are almost at the bikes, a guy on a Dakar Spec Triumph suddenly takes off, rides down into a field, and around the blockade. The cops are pissed, and want to know who he was, but no one knew. I had a printout of the invite, so I showed them it was an open invite and anyone could come. We all passed our endorsements checks. Everyone did the breath test blowing a 0.00 back. They had no idea how to inspect bikes, but since there were no obvious defects with the bikes they couldn't impound anything. With no reason to detain us, they had to let us go, and we rolled out without anything else happening for the rest of the ride.